And welcome everyone. We should be live. I'm here with one of the smartest people I know, Reasoned Answers, and one of the most insightful people I know, Thunderous One. And thank you guys for being here, and thank you to the audience for being here. Please drop me a one in the comments to let me know that we actually have a live connection.
Appears to be live. I'm seeing it.
Yeah, we do seem to have a live connection, and I hope the audio is functioning correctly today, so he never returns as a horse. The Duza, welcome guys, and Marion Gran Bruheim. Ah, okay, we have a yay. All right, thank you guys. Good to have you all here. Today's topic is the discussion of the meaning of the word atheism. I went through, I don't know, give or take 30 academic references. We're going to discuss that, and we're going to get input from the guys. So thank you both for being here. Any comments from you guys before we begin? Thunderous, you're very popular with the audience. So any comment from you before we begin?
I think my controversies are more popular. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with Mr. T and Lloyd for another show. Enjoy the show, and any questions you have, if you put them in side chat, we'll hopefully address them.
All right. And Reasoned?
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Always good to be with Lloyd. He has the most amazing research, does a fantastic job, so I'm honored just to be a part of it. We've seen in response to Lloyd's series on atheism, we've had a fair number of atheists come in, and they all seem to want to say the same thing. They all want to seem to say that we don't know what atheism is, we're using the wrong definition. Well, today we get to find out who's right.
Have we not heard that kind of line of reasoning from another area in these kind of discussions?
We have. I don't remember if it was Lloyd or I who coined it, but we're using the phrase, that's not my dictionary, just like Muslims say, that's not my scholar.
Yeah. Yeah, on that point, let me just close that. Yeah, on that point, here's something. Hold on, let's just swap screens. I'm just going to go to no camera for a second. This just came in a few minutes ago on Thaddeus's channel. Reasoned Answers, may I kindly suggest that you actually take a look at dictionaries. Communism is an atheist movement, sure, but that doesn't make atheists communists. And Reasoned Answers very kindly, very wryly says, may I kindly suggest that you actually take a look at dictionaries? Doing that today. He says, doing that today, right here. So that's quite funny, you know. Sorry, let me just get that.
Yeah, he started off with the line that atheism is just the mere lack of belief. And I said, strange that atheists always want to redefine the term when all the dictionaries defined atheism as a positive position that there is no God. And then his reply was, may I suggest you actually take a look at the dictionaries? So here we are, taking a look at the dictionaries.
We're going to be doing exactly that. Yeah. Right. So I've got the slides open. And yeah, I've got us. So Krizar, is this pre-recorded or live stream? This is a live stream. So yeah, yeah, you're welcome to chat, and we will be responding, I guess, in real time to the chat. The atheist experience has every sign of the questions was and where's your evidence for God? You know, I've watched the atheist experience a few times, and those are the most smug people I've ever seen. It's incredible how insulated they are from anything outside. Look, a point perhaps I should make. The atheist worldview, a priori, by default, excludes anything that is supernatural, anything that is not physical. So basically, they've taken their telescopes, they've pointed their telescopes at the stars, they've looked for dolphins, they can't find any dolphins, and therefore dolphins do not exist. You bigots who believe in dolphins. You see? Because their telescopes don't see dolphins. Dolphins do not exist. There never have been dolphins, there never will be dolphins. And this is their worldview. So their worldview, by default, excludes anything outside of their worldview. How can that worldview be open to evidence for something outside of the worldview? These people are intellectual bigots and intellectual midgets. Your guys' thought on that?
Yeah, I can't comment on that specific YouTube channel or whatever because I've never seen it. But my experience with atheism is that usually atheists are extremely arrogant and not particularly well educated. I would suggest that the average atheist probably has about the same intelligence and same education as an average theist, yet thinks that he's 10 levels above.
Yeah, becoming an atheist adds 30 IQ points. Ask Brian Dolt. Everybody knows Brian Dolt, the famous atheist with such a wide variety of words in his vocabulary.
It's just the way that it's been marketed. I mean, let's if we really analyze it, atheism has been marketed and branded whenever it's presented on television. If I can just give like my opinion on this. When you look at a discussion between a theist and an atheist, in my experience, when those discussions take place on, say, a TV show or a panel, what you have a very articulate, intelligent atheist, say Richard Dawkins or Neil deGrasse Tyson, or say a Brian Cox. These are atheists, they promote atheism. But when they're having, say, someone that believes in an idea or a theist on there, they tend to select something, fruit from the low-hanging fruit. So the person may not have English as their first language, or they may not be very articulate in presenting why they don't accept evolution or atheism and opt for intelligent design. And what happens is the audience are disconnected straight away, because what's happening there is academic gatekeeping. Okay, authoritative gatekeeping. So hiding behind the titles and positions is where the authority of atheism lies, and people think that by mentally aligning themselves with it, that somehow that flatters their ego. It's just a marketing strategy.
Yeah, it should be noted in the late 1800s, and a group of atheists, materialists, literally took their secular humanist views and literally took over the academic establishment. They specifically exclude anything outside of the material. And their view specifically, and this is pushed by secular humanism, the religion of secular humanism, that to be scientific, you must be atheist. To not be atheist is to be anti-scientific. And they created the propaganda that the church is against science, that being religious means you are anti-scientific, your thinking is primitive. This was a specific propaganda strategy from the late 1890s onwards. Thaddeus, you were going to say?
Yeah, if I may add something to what Thunderous said. Sean McDowell, well-known Christian apologist, who's a normal, reasonable guy, he was told straight up by a TV program that they weren't interested in having him on. They were only interested in having on someone who would say outrageous things and be flamboyant and make Christianity look bad, because they wanted the ratings of a crazy character representing Christianity. They didn't want a boring intellectual discussion. They wanted some firebrand who would be embarrassing.
Oh man,
exactly that. It's the bear baiting, and what happens is it wins approval with the audience, not just do they get better ratings, but what they're listening to is you've got these academic and authoritative gatekeepers that have positions within certain scientific fields, serving as druids or high priests, and the TV audience are listening to the arguments of these heretics that you're mentioning, Mr. T, making them look stupid. And obviously nobody wants to be identified with anything that looks or sounds stupid. So the automatic default is, because it flatters their ego, they go and align themselves with atheism. And it's very similar to what Islam does, but I'm sure Lloyd will bring that up later.
No, you can simply train someone to be an atheist propagandist, trained to misrepresent Christianity, and off you go. Okay, so let's begin with this. Thanks, guys. So thank you all for being here, and let's jump into our presentation. It's called Atheos, without God. I might change the title to Against God. So, atheism defined. Now, here's my question. If atheism is merely a lack of belief, then what is the opposite of theism? You would think the opposite of theism would be atheism. But so if atheism is just a lack of belief, as opposed to an actual series of beliefs, the opposite of atheism, so what is the opposite of theism? Well, what is the contradictory of theism? Because if God exists, right, that is called theism. So God does not exist. What is that called if it's not called atheism? So this, I think, is a valid question. And atheists want to tell us it's not atheism. So, yeah, so this is something that we need to answer today. And of course, we're going to be going through a bunch of academic references. And we've already heard the excuse, that's not my dictionary. Right. Atheists invent their own definitions. This is common in Islam as well. We've seen this over and over. Now, the prefix is a negation, right? It is, so a negation means you actively reject something, you actively negate something, you take the opposite position. Now, one could say without. This is the most simple, except viewing it as the word without, viewing the prefix as meaning without, that is actually the second definition. The initial definition of is not. So, not God. Now, theos is God and atheos without God. Now, this is what we are commonly presented. Correctly, it is not God, against God. You nodded your head, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's just a negative prefix, so not is the simplest explanation. But saying that an atheist is not God doesn't exactly sound right. So we alter that a little and we say without God, or against God is also accurate for the atheism in practice.
Yeah. So the claim that atheism is the absence of belief, thus needing no evidence, is a rhetorical strategy to deceive. To deny that atheism is a doctrinal position and argument is a sophism, to remove the burden of coherent proof. Now, how is this lack or absence a knowledge claim scientific? Because atheists claim that their views are based on science. Right? How is a lack of something, how is an absence a void? How is this a knowledge claim or scientific? So, therefore, they cannot have any position, right? How is an absence of something scientific? Now, this definition is a clever yet very deceptive sophistry. I've got to fix my little typo there. Your guys' comments on that? Thunderous, I'll let you go.
No, just I've got nothing to add on. It's very self-explanatory.
Thunderous, Thaddeus, anything from you?
No, I think that you explained it well.
Right. So, typically to claim that there is no God is a knowledge claim. A lack of something is not a knowledge claim. It's an emotional feeling. It's fifis. Let's continue. Now, there are non-theists, and in fact, you can find this word used everywhere in academia, a non-theist, to describe someone who's not theistic. This is a very commonly used term. Here's just a few examples, 7 examples. So the term non-theist already exists to denote individuals who merely lack belief in God, as does the word agnostic. So we don't even have to use the word non-theist. We already have the word agnostic for that. Here's just a few examples, which I found: Atheist and Other Non-Theistic Perspectives, right? A Companion to Philosophy of Religion, 2nd edition. Graham Oppy, currently the world's most famous academic atheist and defender of atheism, by theist and non-theist alike. This is as I said, Arguing About Gods, Cambridge 2009. Nicholas Everett. The challenge is anyway not one which the non-theist needs to meet, right? William Rowe, atheist. We theist and non-theist must each blah blah. Kevin Timper, most moral theorist, theist or non-theist. And the Oxford Handbook of Philosophical Theology, right? Blah blah. Persuasive to a non-theist. Jake Chandler and Probability and Philosophy of Religion, Oxford book, non-theist. So in other words, if you have a lack of belief, you're a non-theist. But atheists seem to be very, very, very interested in Christianity and destroying the idea of God. Your comments before I go on.
Yeah, this is clearly a strange thing that atheists do. They are quite insistent on redefining the term when there are perfectly valid terms that they could use to describe as an atheist, as someone who has a positive position, a definite position that there is no God. If they want to just say we lack belief, they can say, I'm a non-theist, I'm agnostic. And often this is even worse, that atheists try to lump all people who are not Christians, so to speak, together. They call it the religious nuns. But a lot of people who say they don't believe in any particular religion believe in God, and atheists want to wrap it all up together to make their numbers look bigger. What other religion wants to inflate their numbers, I wonder?
Oh, they wrap up all the not real Muslims into with the world's fastest. Yeah, yeah. They're not real Muslims. Yeah, but we're the world's biggest religion. Yeah, growing, blah, blah, blah. I would call Absolute Prophet a non-theist. He's not going after God, he's going after Allah. Yeah, I've actually heard him debate and discuss atheism, and I was not impressed. Absolutely, positively not impressed. But yeah, at least he's not directly antithetical. Right, so religious atheism. We've now introducing ourselves to a man called Ludwig Feuerbach, who died in 1872. What yesterday was still religion is no longer such today, because they, at that point, with the Enlightenment, they were very, very busy trying to destroy Christianity specifically. And he says, and what today is atheism, tomorrow will be religion. That's Ludwig Feuerbach. So Marion says she's losing the sound. The sound is not stable. Testing, testing. Okay, this might be YouTube. Sorry, because
Yeah, through Skype it's perfect. So I'm not quite sure what's going on.
yeah, that may be a YouTube issue. I mean, let me continue. Right, now, notice Friedrich Engels tells us that all the communists of 1845 were followers of Feuerbach. And this man wrote, "Man alone is our God." Now, recently we had an atheist come on the channel and state that he is a God. Because he's an atheist, he is the highest example of evolution. Therefore, he is a man become God. He said he is his own God, and we've seen this statement made by atheists. You are gods. Man alone is our God, our Father, our Judge, our Redeemer, our true home, our law, and our rule. The Alpha and the Omega of our life. Very Christian use of imagery and words there. And our political, moral, public, and domestic activities. So man alone is the be-all and end-all of their existence. There is no salvation save through the medium of man. So this is really just the replacement of Christian ideas with these atheistic ideas. Any comments from you guys?
Well, for me, straight away, we look at the third point is Genesis 3 verses 1 to 5. You can be your own God was the argument that Satan presented to Eve. You'll be just like God, knowing good and bad. So in effect, you can judge for yourselves morally what is right and what is wrong. You may even make up your own laws as to what is right and wrong. So that for me is exactly, those who follow the biblical narrative will know that argument, and it's been going on for the past 6,000 years anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but notice also that they speak of there's no salvation save through the medium of man, that man alone, man is everything. You see modern atheists saying exactly the same thing. Now they want to claim that they have nothing to do with socialism, nothing to do with communism, yet they ape literally the words of major communists. So,
well, what I don't know if this is going to be brought out in your discussion today, Lloyd, but they use the term moral there. Surely, if they're atheists, they are amoral because there's nothing beyond the material. So how do they define morality in an amoral universe?
Very true, because if you reject that there is a transcendent divine lawgiver with transcendent divine moral law, then how do you derive your moral system if you've rejected the Bible, rejected Christianity, rejected Jesus, rejected God? Where do you get those ideas from? Well, it's called opinion. That is
now, you made. Sorry, can I just add one more thought on that?
Sure.
You said that this guy had said that from evolution they'd reached their highest points, but in that line of reasoning, if you was to go with Darwinian evolution, how do you know you've reached the pinnacle? Surely you're still evolving. So you're only partway through the journey then. You don't know where the journey is going to end as far as Darwinian evolution is concerned.
Yeah, well, I guess that might makes right. Right?
Yeah,
they're not primitives.
So.
Maybe
all is transgender and
actually they have
maybe that's evolution.
Actually, they have a definition because they believe that man started off as primitive, then he moved towards paganism, then he moved towards organized religion, then he abandons organized religion, he moves towards capitalist social structure, then he abandons capitalism, he moves towards socialism, and socialism is the glorious path that leads us to the final paradise, the final state of heaven, which is communism. So they are on the path of socialism to communism, so therefore they are the enlightened ones.
So if a person is a theist, they're not stupid, they're not naive, they're not gullible, they're just following a pattern of thinking that they've evolved to think in the first place. So it was evolution that did this, that allowed theism to exist. So theism, from their point of view, would be a product of evolution then.
Correct. And this is part of the dialectic that Marx mentioned. In fact, they say that, Marx called us primitive, Lenin said we were primitive, Stalin said so, and atheists say exactly the same thing, primitive, superstitious thinking. They're literally verbatim repeating Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Engels, Hitler,
yeah,
and yet they are not communists. And he said that ideas rested ultimately upon matter, and the driving force of history was mankind's material conditions, not his spiritual or philosophical ideas. Now, he influenced Karl Marx, and we can also state that he influenced guys like Richard Dawkins. He influenced guys like Daniel Dennett, Sham Harris, because they also believe that ideas rest ultimately upon matter, materialists. B.F. Skinner and other major atheists of the 20th century. So these atheists are very much acting like and verbatim repeating communists. Thaddeus, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they technically have some different beliefs, but that comes down to the same basic principles. There is no God. All that there is matter, blind chance, however you want to phrase it. Going back to earlier when you asked about how they can have morals, well, atheists have lots of theories of moral laws. They generally all assume the intrinsic value of human beings, which is totally contradictory to their worldview, and thus they never really get off the ground in the first place. In the end, the only moral that an atheist has that is, not just a matter of opinion, is that whatever the greatest power in the world gives, that is what everyone must follow. Might makes right, as you put it.
Yeah.
And this is why they can't go beyond the point of matter in it, because when you start going beyond the point of matter, then you have to evoke some kind of theistic belief system because of objective moral laws. Now, one of the arguments is that Dawkins and Krauss, because I have that on my YouTube channel, it will go back a bit very soon, audience, and that is free will does not exist.
Of course, we discussed that yesterday. We will be talking more about that as we go, but we discussed that last night on a stream. And Ken Johnston says that Matt Dillahunty, man, that is one smug human, one really smug human. Said he believes in a form of socialism and one world government. Now, he believes in Marxism and one world government because it's just, you just got to be nice about it. That's all. Now, Feuerbach tells us in the consciousness of the infinite, the conscious subject has for his object the infinity of his own nature. See, you are the infinite universe. If man is to find contentment in God, he must find himself in God. And he wrote extensively on this, and what this means is that God is nothing else than human. God is the outward projection of a human's inward nature. You are God. So God is your inner nature expressed in the world. So you are doing godly things. And he says, a God who is not benevolent, compassion, not just, not wise, is no God. Qualities are not denoted as divine because of their godly association. The qualities themselves are divine. You are doing good in the world. So if you're burning down, I don't know, Washington, D.C. or, some city in the States to bring good into the world, that's because you are doing good. You're doing good for the sake of the future, right? So these qualities themselves are divine. You are making divine decisions because you are divine, therefore making God divine, indicating that humans are capable of understanding and applying meanings of divinity to religion, and not that religion makes a human divine. So you are divine. You are expressing divinity. This is very much a cloaked Gnostic idea, because with the Gnostics, pieces of the divine, right, the evil God supposedly attacked the good God, pieces of that evil fell into the world, and those shards are inside us as our souls, and so therefore we are divine. People who believe in love and light and all of that stuff, the New Age woo-woo stuff, this is very much the same idea. Any comments before I go on?
Nope.
So he says, God is the principle of man's salvation, of man's good dispositions and actions. Consequently, man's own good principle and nature. So you are, what you do is godly, because you are God. You can do no wrong, therefore. So this is hubris. This is hubris on a spectacular scale. So what you do is good. Your actions are good. And of course, if it's actions, well, I mean, there's also the Sharia that has a whole list of things that you need to do, to be like God. But anyway. Now, let's have a look at some definitions. So we're going to go to Wikipedia, right? So we're going to look at the Enlightenment. Atheism was first used to describe a self-avowed belief. Now, self-avowed, we'll have a look at that in a moment, a self-avowed belief in late 18th century Europe. Now, atheists today want to claim, well, atheism goes back to the proud traditions of the Romans and the Greeks of the 2600 years ago, where the finest minds, nonsense, pagans, right? And also atheism had a very different meaning 2600 years ago. But so understand, modern atheism only extends to the late 1700s, for the mid to late 1700s, specifically denoting disbelief in the monotheistic Abrahamic God. In other words, rejecting the Christian God. So atheism, as it started historically, is specifically a rejection by these Enlightenment thinkers in Europe of Christianity. In an even narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities. And again, you will see specifically that there is no Christian God. Now, the definition of self-avowed, that means openly acknowledged or declared by oneself as being such, asserted to be true or real, something you assert, a position you take. This is something that you claim, right? It is a knowledge claim, it is a truth claim, it is a position, it is a conclusion that you have reached on the basis of your reason, and you've now stated this to be true. And the first known use of the word self-avowed was 1819 in the meaning defined here above. Your thoughts, guys?
Well, it's Wikipedia, so we can just throw that one out, and anyone could have just edited that. Maybe a theist went in there and edited that to say that atheism is the position that there is no deities.
Maybe Martin Luther went in there and changed it. You never know. He could still be around today. You never know. Maybe the Dalai Lama did. Heck, who knows? No, but atheism, understand, modern atheism is a new phenomenon. It actually only dates to the mid to late 1700s. So atheism as we know it today is very, very new. It is not something that has a glorious, illustrious history going back to Rome, to Julius Caesar and Aristotle. All right, now.
But before you move on,
Yeah.
I did want to point out that, according to the Wikipedia, which is probably accurate, I mean, it's almost always accurate, that atheism arose specifically to deny Christianity. Not surprising, considering when we look at atheists today, they say they're against all religion, but they really mean they're against Christianity. You never see them talking about, say, Buddhism, and they never point out the flaws of Buddhism. It's always about Christianity. In practice, atheism is really anti-Christian. It's not really anti-religion.
Correct. No, correct. Yes, Thunderous, you want to
I was just going to say, Mr. T really brings out a good point on that one, that it is, because when you look at the atheistic worldview, every tenet of theirs, particularly today, attacks the Bible directly, or one of the Christian moral codes that we have, or some kind of principle that is found in the Bible. They, as Mr. T said, they don't attack, say, Taoism, Shintoism, Buddhism, Sikhism, or Hinduism. And but the argument they may turn around and say, well, those religions aren't violent. But it kind of shows a level of ignorance that they have, because when you look at the Christian belief system, ours is not violent either. But it's a threat to you, because it's when you look at the moral code, it's the one that's written in your psyche. You mentioned a point earlier on, Lloyd, that atheism, this is sort of like from the late 17th century, and that kind of
18th
ties
century.
in with, sorry?
Late 18th.
Late 18th century. It kind of ties in with like the Renaissance that I brought out.
The Enlightenment.
Several weeks.
Yeah.
The Enlightenment, and how even before Erasmus Darwin, the theory of animals coming from some kind of goo in the ground had already started to come about in the 17th century.
Yeah.
So the tie-in and the parallel in the stream of time can be very well easily calibrated, because when you're talking about modern atheism, you can see that as science was moving forward, they've just tried to blend it and graft it in together.
Correct. Yeah. So now, as you all know, There is the saying, nature adores a vacuum. Because atheism is just a lack of belief. It's this void, this emptiness, you know. Nature adores a vacuum. That's scientific, okay? Now, this is Paul-Henri Théry, or commonly known as Baron de Olbach. He was an 18th century advocate of atheism. So he advocated for people to have a lack of belief, you know. So he advocated for people not to think about bananas, to have a lack of belief about bananas, right? Now, he advocated for a psychological state, because atheists like to tell us, I don't have beliefs, I have a psychological state. I just have the psychological state of the lack of belief. You see, it's not a belief, it's just, my psychology, I don't have a belief, right? So how do you advocate for a psychological state? How do you advocate? Because don't forget, atheism doesn't exist. Atheism is not a thing, it's not a belief, it's not a set of ideas, it's just a lack of belief psychologically. It doesn't exist. How do you advocate for something that does not exist? Thaddeus, you nodded your head.
Yeah, I mean, good question. We have atheist YouTube channels. We have professional atheist speakers who make all their money going around giving talks about atheism. And apparently all they ever say on their YouTube channels and in their hour-long talks is, hello, everyone. Did you know that atheism is merely the lack of belief? Therefore, we have nothing else to say today. Thank you for attending our conference.
Yeah, exactly. Now, understand that you can only advocate.
There, Lloyd.
Sorry?
Lost your sound there for a couple seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Just go ahead and repeat it.
You can only advocate for a position. You cannot advocate for something that doesn't exist. You cannot advocate for a psychological state. Right? You can only advocate for a position. So maybe these weren't real atheists or something. Now, he's told us here in one of his most famous sayings, the source of man's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature, the pertinacity with which he clings to blind opinions imbibed in his infancy, which interweave themselves with his existence, the consequent prejudice that warps his mind, that prevents its expansion, that renders him the slave of fiction, appears to doom him to continual error. He's talking about your Christianity, by the way. Now, Marx said almost identical things, worded differently, but Marx had exactly the same sentiment. Guess they weren't real socialists either. Sorry, yes?
Dawkins said something very similar as well in a different way, saying that when you raise children, it's a form of child abuse to bring them up with a particular form of theism, because it prejudices their mind to the outside world. So he refers to this kind of stuff as a form of child abuse. Also with some of the religions that we know that have a constant threat of hell. And you know what? It's a very emotional argument. You can actually, as people who follow the biblical narrative, when you look at, say, Islam, as we often do, you can see why that people like Dawkins have an argument, because we nod our heads in the same way. That's a good argument to have, because Islam does do that to children, and it creates an adult with a prejudice in his mind that expands this into all of his worldviews.
Yeah, but atheism is just a lack of belief. But this looks like he has taken a very jaundiced eye at Christianity, at the church, at Christian society, and he's going like, we don't like this. We want to replace it with the lack of belief. Well, you can't just replace something and leave a gaping hole. You're going to fill it with something. Now,
before you move on, I want to ask you guys and the audience a question. You know, I'm sure everyone watching has been unhappy at times. Thinking back on the last time you were unhappy, was it because you had some ignorance of nature, or was it because something that some other human being did? Just throwing that out there. Because, you know, this fellow says that the source of man's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature. If we all just understood nature, then we would never be unhappy again.
What nature is that referring to, Mr. T? Is that the one where the lion goes into a pride and he kills the alpha male lion, and then he kills all the alpha males, little puppy lions, the little cubs, and then he rapes all the female lionesses in that tribe? Is that the nature they're referring to, or cannibalism nature? Which nature are we looking at?
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's his point, is that, you know, nature doesn't care about your feelings, so stop having them.
Well, you know, maybe such people, you know, considering the length of time they've got in this mortal coil, maybe they should question if they've got more days behind them than ahead of them. And if they can reconcile that they've got more days behind them than ahead of them, then maybe they should do something better with their lives, because there's not a long time left.
Okay, now we're going to talk about a guy called Jordan Sobel. This man was regarded as the most important academic defender of atheism prior to a man called Graham Oppy. So he's now obviously long since dead. And he was citing another scholar in a book called Logic and Theism, Arguments for and Against Beliefs in God, Jordan Howard Sobel, published by Cambridge University Press. This is a university textbook. And he says if one takes up the task of providing sound arguments for atheism, formidable difficulties arise. Interesting. This is the world's leading atheist academic of the time. It is much easier to punch holes in theistic arguments than to actually argue for the truth of atheism. This reminds me 100% of Abdulism. It is much easier to attack the Bible, to claim that Jesus didn't exist, to misrepresent Christian beliefs, than to actually defend the filth that is found within Islamic law, for instance. But it is much easier to punch holes in theistic arguments than to actually argue for the truth of atheism. And this is in Logic and Theism, Arguments for and Against Beliefs in God, page 401, Cambridge 2009. Before his death, Sobel was considered the leading philosophical defender of atheism prior to Graham Oppy. Note, he is describing what is called eristic, in Islam called hiyal. This is sophistry designed to attack a position and undermine it, not to find truth, but to destroy the opposition, destroy the argument.
Yeah, I mean, that's some stark honesty there. And this is why atheists argue that atheism is just a lack of belief, because they don't want to have to defend their position, because they know that it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to defend an atheist worldview. So instead, they just try to say, we're the default. If you can't 100% prove your belief according to my standards, then I'm right. And that's what the typical atheist does. And that's because the very few philosophical arguments for atheism are really weak.
Well, don't forget, their argument, their worldview, by default excludes any concept of God, any concept of the supernatural, any concept of the divine. It has already, in advance, rejected that. Like, remember, those telescopes looking at the stars that can't see the dolphins have already rejected the existence of oceans and dolphins. So they can't see it. So their telescopes don't look at oceans. Their telescopes looking upwards, not downwards. So this is simply just a game, a word game that they're playing.
Yeah, very much what Dr. David Belinsky put in his book, The Devil's Delusion. And his argument is atheism is that anything's better than nothing, nothing is better than God. Correct.
So guys, thank you for being here, guys. If you like the content, if you like the material, the research, the conversation, please do like, do share, do subscribe, and let everyone know about this so that we understand we're standing on very strong ground when we come from a theistic background. And I wouldn't say Islam is theistic in that sense. From a Christian background, atheism is, once you look at its history, it really falls apart very, very fast. So now, when the latter is undertaken, so when you try to defend atheism, he tells us, when the latter is undertaken, we find that the needs of and problems of the atheist are parallel to those of the theist. To impose the same argumentative restrictions upon the atheist is to show that the position is at least as inadequately defended as theism. Whatever the reasons for its widespread acceptance, atheism is no less a matter of faith than theism. So just thought I should point it out. This is from the leading academic atheist of the day. Your thoughts before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, some rare honesty here, that the atheist looks at the world or he looks at the arguments for his position and he says, yeah, they're really not that great. But those theist arguments aren't really that great either. So that really should lead him to a position of agnosticism, though. It really should lead him to a position where he says, we just can't tell because no one has any good arguments.
Yeah.
This Jordan Sobel, if he was alive now and he was having a discussion with, say, another atheist, it could be very much on a parallel with Mo Hijab and Yasser Qadi when he says there are holes in the narrative. We don't let this out to other people. This is not good, Aki. Academia will catch up, and they have no red line, and the theist doesn't have a red line. But you can see the parallel there. And the first thing that came to my mind as well was that. When you're talking to an atheist, it's very much like talking to a Muslim. The argument is, like I say, they're punching holes, but they're following a script. It's not a script that they themselves have thought. It's a script from the atheist propaganda machine, where they just repeat and regurgitate, rinse and repeat the same arguments.
Right. So, opposing views. Now, theism, as classically defined throughout history, right, and atheism are contradictories, such that if theism is true, then atheism is false, and vice versa. This has always been the case. So as we learn from both academia and from history, atheism is defined in terms of theism as its opposing view, its contradictory, its opposite view. Welcome, Nicholas. Thank you very much for stopping in. The Swedish contingent checking in. Welcome. These terms are about a doctrinal position on God's existence, and not about a person's psychological state. You can find any number of comments within academia stating exactly what I'm saying here. Now, this lack of belief is a conclusion. No sensible person reaches a conclusion without basing it on a foundation of what they believe to be true. It's not just a lack of belief. You've come to that conclusion. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "If I do not choose, that is still a choice." So I guess he was a dumb Enlightenment thinker. I guess, the atheists are going to go, Sartre did live 200 years ago. You can't be very smart. Now, in the same way, if I don't believe something exists, then I still have to believe that the non-existence of that thing is the truth. In other words, it's still a belief. They're simply playing a sophist word game with you. Now, let's have a look at the Oxford Dictionary. Why is it called the Oxford Dictionary? Because somehow it doesn't exactly take the standard internet atheist position on what atheism means. Because we are told by atheists every day, just like Abdul's, what the Quran actually says, or what the tafsir says, or whatever. We have to believe them, not their scholars. We have to believe the atheist, not the scholars. So the Oxford Dictionary is in denial, and it tells us atheism, noun, right? Forms 1500s, all right? In current use, and it tells us here, disbelief in or denial of the existence of a God. So the atheists that are denying God are clearly doing it wrong. They don't just have a lack of belief. Those are not real atheists. Also, disregard of duty to God, a godlessness, practical atheism. So disregard of duty to God, a disregard of the moral law. Now, the word denial, it's important to define the word denial, to deny, an assertion that an allegation is false, according to Merriam-Webster. So if they deny God, they are asserting, they're making a truth claim. They are asserting that they have evidence for a position, for an argument. So if you have an argument, then you have a position. A statement that something is not true or does not exist. That's the Cambridge Dictionary. So this is not just a lack of belief. These are truth claims. These are knowledge claims. These are arguments that you are making. And there's an older word, this atheal, okay, which is just atheistic. It's obsolete version, but it says here without God and also denying God. Your guys on that?
Yeah, the distinction between disbelief and lack of belief is very important there, and you nailed it by looking at the definition for deny. Disbelief is to say something is false. Lack of belief is to say, I don't have an opinion.
Atheists have a lot of opinions. A lot of opinions. We've all heard them. We've all heard them go off on their opinions. It's like people who do CrossFit and people who are vegans, just give them a couple of seconds. They're going to tell you. Right? No offense to people who do CrossFit and people who are vegans, but just stop telling us. Okay, now, sophists and sophistry, and a man called Protagoras. Right, let's have a look at the word sophistry in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Sophistry, subtly deceptive reasoning or argumentation. First known use, 14th century in English. Right, subtly deceptive reasoning or argumentation. Atheism is built on sophistry. Now, the sophists were ancient Greek teachers of rhetoric and philosophy prominent in the 5th century BC. These philosophers were considered adroit in their reasoning, but later philosophers, particularly Plato, Aristotle as well, described them as sham philosophers, out for money, willing to say anything to win an argument. Eventually, being called a sophist was a slur, was a bad word. Sophist, from Greek sophistes, wise man or expert, sophisticated, earned a negative connotation as a captious or fallacious reasoner. People who were very skilled at lying. Sophistry is reasoning that seems plausible on a superficial level but is unsound or used to deceive. Aristotle, Plato, and others. Now, Plato has a lot of guilt here as well, though. But these people simply say that these people are teaching people to lie for money. And in Islam, it's called hiyal. Your guys' thoughts?
The first thing that came to my mind with this is that the Apostle Paul warned us to turn away from the falsely called knowledge. I forget which book it's in, Galatians or Colossians, but with the Paul warned us against this falsely called knowledge, where it flatters the ego, but it's actually set out to deceive people away from theism.
Yeah, it's in Timothy, correct?
I would just say that last definition there is a perfect description of atheism, reasoning that seems plausible on a superficial level, and they never want to go beyond that, but is unsound or used to deceive. Atheism has a lot of problems when you dig into it, when you really examine it philosophically at a high level, as the professional philosophers have pointed out who happen to be atheists, say, our position doesn't really hold up very well. So I think that definition is just kind of like a perfect description of atheism, even though it says sophistry right there. It really is a description of exactly what atheists do.
Well, we can actually... Sorry, go on, Thunders.
I was going to say that's because the arguments are all emotional and not logical. That's why it's sophistry. Because if there was any credibility and it was logical, then you wouldn't need any point of sophistry, would you? You just tell the truth.
Yeah.
But because your premise is based on a lie, all you could ever do is lie to defend it. Hence why it's sophistry. As
we will learn going through in the future in this and other episodes, we will learn that the philosophy of atheism. Remember, atheism is a late 18th century philosophy. Right, so it's about 250 years old, give or take. So it's a late 18th century philosophy, and you will learn that the arguments, the ideas, the worldview, the rationale that is put forward by these Enlightenment atheists, by these communist atheists, by modern atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sham Harris, these are just repetitions, rephrasings of ideas from 6th century BC Greece and Rome, from 6th, 4th, and 5th century BC Rome. These are pagan ideas. These are quite literally pagan ideas that are simply just recycled and regurgitated. As we will learn in Protagoras, this is actually relevant. In fact, the basis of these atheist ideas, historically and philosophically, is on the basis of these sophists, and Protagoras being one of the chief ones. So a lot of these ideas are just recycled 6th century BC pagan ideas. They've slapped the word science on it and sent it out the door with no clothes on as the emperor. That's all that's happened. But we'll get into that as we go. So, etymology. So we'll come to etymology a few times as we go through this. From ancient Greek, atheos, godless, without a god. An atheist, one who rejected the gods worshipped by the wider society. This was an active rejection. To reject is a verb. It is something you do. References atheos, okay, in various, from 1879, a Latin dictionary, Oxford. Never heard of those guys, Oxford. Atheist in 1934, this French Latin dictionary, and atheos, blah, blah, blah. So this is from Wiktionary, but utilizing multiple different things. Atheists are people who rejected the gods. Right. Now, we're going to the most famous of the philosophical encyclopedias in the world today, regarded as the most famous. This is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And it's all in my head, they say. The sophist redefinition of atheism as a lack of belief attempts to define this proposition as a description of a psychological state. Notice, just like Abdul's redefine words, just like the woke redefine words, the atheists have redefined the lack of belief as a description of a psychological state. A psychological state, however, is not a truth claim. It merely is. Right? A psychological state, a feeling, is not a truth claim on anything. It is just something that is. Now, psychological states cannot be true and they cannot be false, nor can they be conclusions of arguments. Yet, we know that atheists have decided what is true and what is false. They have concluded based on whatever reasons they have, that God does not exist, Christianity is false, atheism is true. So either you just have a psychological state, which will be a temporary position, by the way. Psychological states are temporary. You don't have these permanent sort of like, or they have a position. They need to come clean. Now, a psychological state is not a claim which is positive or negative of anything. Thus, notice, my pet rock is an atheist. The cat next door is an atheist. My toaster is an atheist. Oh boy. Hey, I've found another atheist here. There's a lack of belief. Here it is, hanging from this string. Atheist. Found one in my teacup. Believe it or not. Thaddeus, your thoughts?
Well, I think you just proved that atheism is the fastest growing religion, because you've gone from, 100,000 atheists in the world. I should have said 100 million, to being like literally billions and billions and billions, because every grain of sand is an atheist. So clearly there are far more atheists in the world than any other belief system now.
Oh man, that's terrifying. Yes, I'm using an atheist microphone, by the way. Yes, Thunderous?
And they're all subjective. They're not objective values. They're subjective. So it's how you interpret the world outside the material world as to how you draw your arguments. Yeah. So it's a bit subjective argument at best.
Yeah. Actually, I want to mention something Villainous very correctly said. I was thinking of it and I didn't say it, but Villainous says this is why Christians were first considered atheists by ancient Rome. So what's important here is this, that don't forget the emperor was a god, right? And if you didn't believe in the emperor as a god, you were considered an atheist. Christians were considered atheists. Many different times you'll find references to Christians being termed atheists because they rejected the emperor as a god. They wouldn't worship him, a human, the creation, as God. So one who rejected God's worship of the wider society. So the emperor was considered God, and atheists, Christians, were considered such because they would not worship the emperor. They regarded him as human, the ruler, fine and well. But yeah, so atheism had a very different set of connotations way back in the day. Now notice, a proposition is not a psychological state. An argument, a position, a proposition is not a psychological state. However, if someone has an argument to present, if they make a claim, then they have a position. This is not a psychological state. Psychological states are not truth claims. They are not knowledge claims. They do not represent true or false. They just are. So, and yeah, I'll just move on. If you guys have any comments, let me know. Now, a contradiction. Let's have a look at Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. We'll continue. Atheism, it says, is a direct answer to one of the most important metaphysical questions in the philosophy of religion, namely, does God exist? Theism says yes. Atheism says no. So there are only two direct answers to this question. Yes, which is theism, and no, which is atheism. And they call this in the metaphysical sense, not in the fifis. Okay? So this has been the standard position for hundreds of years. It is also natural to define atheism in terms of theism. So atheism is defined in terms of, it's a reaction to, it is the negation of, the opposite of. It follows that it is best for philosophers to understand the in atheism or atheism as negation instead of absence, as not instead of without. In other words, to take atheism to be the contradictory of theism. Your comments, guys?
Well, this is it, isn't it? You know, when the atheist is, to use another guy's phrase, not only do I have to teach you what I believe because you don't know what I believe, but I have to teach you what you believe because you're equally clueless on what you believe as well. So atheism is just a standpoint. I don't believe in a God, but they take as atheism, there is no God, as a categorical direct statement, yet they don't even understand what the terms are.
Yeah, correct. Fair enough. Now the prefix, now I'm going to the online etymology dictionary. You know what's crazy? When I on Al-Fadi's channel, I'm doing my episodes now after like 7 months or something. He finally releases these things on his channel, right? And I'm reading literally out of the Sharia manuals or of the manuals of major scholars of Islam. And they'll tell me, you're lying, you're making things up, you're interpreting things. No, I'm literally reading what it says on the page. I didn't make anything up. I'm reading what it says. There's no need to interpret it. That's what it says. And yeah, I mean, I'm just waiting for these guys to go, well, you misinterpreted that. Like, no, I didn't misinterpret. I just read what it says. And your argument was Stanford University, right? So now, is a prefix meaning not. or without. Notice they put not first, without second, from Greek a, meaning not. The alpha privative, from the root ne, meaning not. Also the source of English un. Also partly nativized as a prefix of negation, asexual. That means you, is this the absence of, or is this not sexual? Amoral, not moral. Agnostic. See, we already have a good word for someone who is not a theist. Agnostic. An atheist is someone who is directly anti-theistic, specifically anti-Christian. The ancient alpha privatum denoting want or absence. Now, this is at the end here, but notice the number of times the word not appears. 3 times, 4 times. This is considered a rejection, an active rejection, a not, a negation. The opposite position of theism. Your thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that we have a term for someone who rejects the proposition that God exists, and that's atheist. And we also have a term for someone who answers it a different way, says, I don't know, or says it's impossible to know. That person is an agnostic. There is no need to redefine atheism. If the atheist doesn't want to defend the positive proposition that there is no God, then they can just call themselves a different term. They don't have to redefine what atheism is. Yet they do this because they actually do want to defend that position, or they do want to adhere to that position anyway. They just don't want to have to actually defend it against you. You know, when you want to argue, they want to say only argue against your position. They don't want to support their own position, just like the Muslims who come to our channels. And we ask them why they believe in Islam, and they say, your Bible is corrupt, which is not a reason to believe in Islam. Or they say, you have immoral prophets, which is not a reason to believe in Islam. Or
they're the same prophets as those of Islam. It's like, hello. Yahweh is evil.
I mean,
we worship the same God. Are you calling your God evil?
There's additional problems, like i.e. the things they're saying are false. But that's not the point I was making. My point was that they want to say something against Christianity. They want to say the Trinity doesn't make sense, or they want to say that Christian priests have molested little boys, or whatever they want to argue, right? It's always something about Christianity. It's never anything about Islam. It's very rare to find a Muslim who comes in and says, I believe in Islam because X, Y, and Z. Instead, they say, you say, why do you believe in Islam? And they don't even mention the word Islam. All they do is give some attacks against Christianity, almost like their position can't be defended. And then atheists do the exact same thing.
But
they
understand,
don't want to defend their position.
This is heuristic. This is heuristic in practice. This is 6th century, 5th century, 4th century BC sophistry in action. You are literally seeing the outcome of the thinking of Protagoras and his crew. This is quite literally heuristic, which is argumentation, which is disputation for the sake of disputation, argumentativeness for the sake of argumentativeness, not to solve a problem, but to simply try to destroy an opposite position. So it is not to find truth. So, yeah. So a negation of theism, again, sticking with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, atheism, they say, is typically defined in terms of theism. Theism is, in turn, is best understood as a proposition, something that is either true or false. It is often defined as the belief that God exists, but here belief means something believed. Okay. And it refers to the propositional content of belief, not to the attitude or psychological state of believing. This is why it makes sense to say that theism is true or false, and to argue for or against theism. They argue against theism, so they are atheists. If, however, atheism is defined in terms of theism, and theism is the proposition that God exists, and not the psychological condition of believing that there is a God, then it follows that atheism is not the absence of the psychological condition of believing that God exists. I'll repeat that. Atheism is not the absence of the psychological condition of believing that God exists. And don't forget, most of these articles that are here are written by atheists. Right? If you go look up the scholars who wrote this, you'll find they are like atheists. The "are" in atheism must be understood as negation instead of absence, as not instead of without. Therefore, in philosophy at least, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist. Or you could say more broadly, the proposition that there are no gods. But in philosophy, it is the proposition, it's the argument you're putting forward, the truth claim, the knowledge claim that God does not exist, which therefore needs reasons, is a conclusion that must be defended. Thunderous, anything from you before we continue?
Well, I was just going to say Romans 1:20 comes to mind when reading that, because the person who is a theist has taken in the information, processed the external world through their own mental processes, and come to the conclusion that there is a deity or an intelligent designer. So therefore, that's their point of their theism. They've gone through a mental process based on the evidence, whereas an atheist is just a state of mind without any mental processing taking place at all.
Yeah, then this is someone who's actually done no cogitation. He's done no thinking. He's made no effort. This is a lazy thinker. This is someone who refuses to look at the evidence. I mean, how can they claim, how is that scientific? Because they do claim to be scientific. How is a lack of investigation scientific?
Well, that's an interesting point, but I don't know if you're going to go into it this evening or maybe another time. But that's where the default state of that scientific argument is Darwinian evolution. So
yeah.
when you have to use the word science, that's where it goes.
Yeah. Now, I would strongly recommend you guys have a look at this thing this book called The Irrational Atheist by Vox Day. Now, Vox Day talks a lot of poop. Excuse my French. I've listened to him for a long time. He talks a bunch of nonsense about a lot of things, but this book is actually very good. I've listened to it 3 times. I bought the audio with the book. I've read the book like once, but I've listened to it like 3 times on Audible. So, dissecting the unholy trinity of Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens. He really dislikes Sam Harris. Okay? He thinks Hitchens is an idiot, but man, but seriously, all 3 of them come out looking very bad. I'll briefly read you the blurb and some information from it. The Irrational Atheist. On one side of the argument is a collection of godless academics with doctorates from the finest universities in England, France, and the United States. On the other is irrational atheist author Vox Day, armed with nothing more than historical and statistical facts. Very powerful historical and statistical facts, by the way. Presenting a compelling argument, but not for the side one might expect, Day strips away the pseudo-scientific pretensions of new atheism with his intelligent application of logic, history, military science, political economy, and well-documented research, as well as some hysterical jokes and some great sarcasm. I appreciated the sarcasm. The arguments of Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens, Dennett, and Michael Onfray are methodically exposed and discredited as Day provides extensive evidence, proving, among other things, that more than 93% of all wars in human history had no relation to religion. Now, we have seen Harris, Dawkins, Christianity cause all wars. Christianity is violence and it's responsible for all violence. This is an absolutely false statement. There are so many different papers disproving this. The Spanish Inquisition had no jurisdiction over professing Jews, Muslims, or atheists, and executed fewer people on an annual basis than the state of Texas. So the Spanish Inquisition lasted, 350 to 400 years? Let's say 350, keep it small. They executed between 3 and 5 people a year. This was a slaughter, a genocide, and the church did not do this. This was a state-sanctioned action. This was done by the state. Atheists are 3.84 times more likely to be imprisoned than Christians. Red state crime, so crimes in red states, right, Republican states, is primarily in the blue counties. Looks like the atheists are committing more crimes. Sexually abused girls are 55 times more likely to commit suicide than girls raised Catholic. I guess having some sort of psychological comfort is important. In the 20th century, atheistic regimes killed 3 times more people in peacetime than those killed in all the wars and individual crimes in the last 1900 years combined. Okay? Atheists in the 20th century killed more people than the last 1,900 years combined. The rational atheist provides the rational thinker with empirical proof that atheism's claims against religion are unfounded in logic, fact, history, and science. Your thoughts on that, guys, before I go
on? And they claim to have the moral high ground.
Yeah. Ken Johnson said The Irrational Atheist is not on Audible. I definitely have it on Audible. I bought it. I can show you my phone. I bought them together. I got a discount on the Audible when I got it when I bought the book. I'm pretty sure I have it. I've listened to it 3 times. It's like 7 hours of audio. Either I was deluded or I actually bought it.
It could be not available in his area.
Yeah, maybe it's not available.
Not necessarily available in every area. So he might have just looked right now and didn't see it, and it's not available in his area. That's highly possible.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some ebooks I can't buy. That's why you bought that book for me last time, because for some reason I just couldn't buy it. It just refused to sell it to me. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, publishers' rights are weird like that. That sometimes a book will only be available in certain countries. So that could be one.
So weird.
But back to the slide here. I recently had a Muslim come in and tell me that Christianity is false because of, among other things, there are Christians in jail. And I pointed out to him that Muslims are extremely overrepresented in prison, that they are 10, 50, maybe 100 times more likely to be in jail than a Christian. Well, apparently it's true of atheists as well, that they're overrepresented in prison. Now, I would not actually suggest the same thing as that Muslim suggested, that somehow proves Islam false or somehow proves atheism false. But it is very interesting that we're told that it's Christians committing the crimes, and the statistics do not back that up.
Yeah, no, I think you're a fact bigot, Thaddeus, for saying that.
Yeah, that's true.
Malvin H.
We
says,
should never go with the facts. We should only go with what the atheist wants us to believe.
I wonder, do different religions in the non-Anglosphere European world have historic atheist movements attacking their religions? If not, suggest that atheism is specifically designed to target Christianity. In fact, historically, Melvin, it is specifically designed to target Christianity. Yes, it's specifically. You'll find it in the references as we go. Nicholas Paulson says, well, these days, most rational people should have distanced themselves from Sam, dead children in the basement, Harris. Yes. He ruined his career with the statements he made on that podcast. Yeah. Now, let's have a look at this. This is America's New Fundamentalists When Atheism Becomes Religion by Chris Hedges. And of course, this was previously published as I Don't Believe in Atheists. Right? So the New Atheists, led by Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris, that is not a typo, do not make moral arguments about religion, he says. He accuses the New Atheists, Dawkins, Hitchens, of promoting a belief system that is not, as they claim, based on reason and science, but on a simplified worldview of us versus them, of intolerance, and the false myths of human progress. Don't forget, this is Marxist dialectical progress and moral superiority. Remember, historical materialism, the progress, that's what they call progressives, it's Marxist. They have created a new form of secular fundamentalism that attempts to permeate society with ideas about our own moral superiority and the omnipotence of human reason. Thunderous, do you want to add anything?
No, I think self-explanatory there.
Okay. Yeah, so this has been noticed. So guys, we've spoken about this. Ideas have consequences. Atheism, as an idea, kills. Right? This is from the Encyclopedia of Wars. It's written by some of the best experts on military history. This is the wars that have happened over the last 10,000 years. And these are secular wars, government wars, atheist wars, right? 93% of all warfare and of all killing in the last 10,000 years. Islam versus all other religions. So all religions on earth except Islam are responsible, potentially one could claim, these are wars where there is a religious component. This is not to state that the religion was the reason for the war. There's a religious component can be attached to this. 3.8% of all wars in history, in recorded history, have a religious component. This is all wars, right? 3.8% of this total. Islam is responsible for 3.2% of all wars. So in other words, Islam by itself is massively violent, right? So be aware of that. Reason and science do not automatically result in an atheist utopia. The 20th century was the most violent century in history, and it was these atheist countries formed, and they were incredibly violent, right? So notice, Nazism, Marxism, fascism, all secular ideologies. They're all are versions of socialism, and they're all atheist. And yeah, I'll just leave that at that. I'll leave it at that. This is the 100 worst atrocities in reason. Now, Sam Harris loves to say the most prolific source of violence in our history is religious faith, specifically Christianity. Well, when you look at the 100 worst atrocities in history, right? You guys have all seen this joke before, I guess, right? I'll give you a moment to read this. Right. So it says, "Sir, the Spanish are coming and they bring a new religion." These are the Aztecs. "How bad is that religion?" the high priest asks. And he says, "It forbids sacrificing children and eating human flesh." Right? So, yeah, apparently we had to stick with that because that pagan stuff was good. And of course, there's the next one where you have these Christian soldiers coming on to the Aztecs. And of course, they are forbidding the mass slaughter they used to do. Oh, look, here comes the far right. So that's just my... Right? And moving on, notice that what you have is, within this 100... This is a study of 100 worst atrocities in history, and it contradicts the claims by Harris and others. Of the 100 events in the detailed study, only 11% are in the category of religious conflict. So only 11 of the world's 100 worst atrocities in history can be said to have a religious component. So again, this is simply not the case, as they claim. And again, if you look at World War I, 35 million dead in just 4 years. But then if you look at, compared to that, the Inquisition, which happened over 350 years, and the Crusades, which happened over 200 years, I'd say we're looking at a problem of scale here that just doesn't match. Your thoughts before we go on?
Yeah, I mean, we're told that religion causes war. The facts don't seem to back that up, but who cares about facts, right? It's all about creating a narrative. And atheists didn't used to argue this way, and they used to, argue in different ways. They would focus on why they don't believe in the Bible, or they would focus on how religion is no longer necessary, a anti-God of the gaps type argument. Nowadays, they usually argue not that religion is false, not that Christianity is false. They argue that it's horrific, that it causes violence, that it has immoral teachings, and so forth, because they found that to be more effective at convincing people who don't, actually investigate things for themselves. So forget about what the facts are. Just use whatever's most effective argument for people who don't bother to look things up. And what sounds worse? That there are contradictions in the Bible, or that Christians kill people. Obviously, the second one sounds worse, so that's what they go to.
I agree. Yeah. Thunderous, anything from you?
Two things. Yeah. Well, first thing is this is very typical of atheists, because it falls into the same mindset as Muslims, and it's what David Wood says. The 99 versus the 1, whereas the 99% would sit there and repeat and rehash the same things that the atheist druids would say, rinse and repeat, religion causes wars, whereas the atheist sitting there in the audience doesn't do any research to see if there's any truth in the statement. So the atheist mindset is very much similar to the Muslim mindset.
Correct. They're both sophists.
Exactly that. And, one of the arguments I use with atheists when they say, well, using this one, I'll say, well, if I take my shoe off and I whack you over the head with my shoe, will you be calling the police to have me arrested or my shoe arrested? And more often than not, they'll turn around and say, well, obviously we're going to get you arrested. And I'll say, well, can you show me in the Bible where it says that religion causes war, that religion has, or that Christianity has anything to do with war? Your argument is flawed, and all you're doing is a rinse and repeat of the atheist argument that you listened to last night on YouTube, which is pretty much the problem now, because Google, Wikipedia, and YouTube and these platforms have become verbs. It's what you do. So atheists and Muslims now falling into that mindset, because I've got this presupposition that there is no God. I need to go out there and find arguments that if like reaffirm my position, and then I'll just rinse and repeat those arguments with any theist that I come across. And this is where we are now.
Let me just fix up my slide here. I just realized that, oh man, because I'm slightly cutting off the bottom of the slide, but that's fine. So, okay, yeah, I think we can end off here tonight. I don't want to go too long, unless you'd like to go a little longer, but we're at an hour, 20 minutes. Actually, we're at an hour 15, so how long shall we go for, guys?
Up to you.
I'm happy to stop here, to be fair.
Okay, yeah, no, so let's go a couple of minutes. So, Carl Sagan. This is a good place to maybe end it. So now we have a man called Carl Sagan. Now, let's have a look at let's have a listen to the very famous quote that Carl Sagan always makes, and that atheists quote us as evidence of his atheism and as of what we should believe is the correct worldview.
The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. All that is, or ever was,
No sound.
or ever will be.
No sound? Should be coming. It should be coming through. So what he says is the cosmos, you might remember this from the movie, from the series documentary, The Cosmos, or Cosmos, from many, many years ago. He says, the cosmos is all that is, all that was, and all that will be. So the cosmos is all that is, all that was, and all that will be. So he's here taking a dig at the idea that God is eternal. He's saying that only the cosmos is eternal. And the term cosmos, if we look into the etymology of the word cosmos, it actually is, it's on a slightly different level than the word logos. The cosmos is the world. It not only means the universe, it also means the world, the material world, the world of the material, which is exactly the atheist, secular, humanist view. So he utilized the word cosmos here very, very specifically to push a particular materialist worldview. And while we are told that the cosmos is all that is, all that was, all that ever will be, that there's nothing but matter, and matter is everything, everything is mechanical, this is the quote that I discovered recently. An atheist is someone who is certain that God does not exist, someone who has compelling evidence against the existence of God. I know of no such compelling evidence. Because God can be relegated to remote times and places and to ultimate causes, we would have to know a great deal more about the universe than we do know to be sure that no such God exists. Now, am I supposed to listen to random internet troll 45, or should I perhaps listen to Carl Sagan? Your guys' thoughts to end off with, yeah?
Well, clearly, Sagan would put himself in the category of agnostic. He might even put himself in what is commonly called a hard agnostic, where they say it's impossible to know whether there is a God or not. Yet, as pointed out earlier, atheists want to just take everyone who's kind of sort of in agreement and throw them all together to increase their numbers and make themselves look more important. Very interesting for a system that is just the psychological state of no belief. They seem to want to advocate, they seem to want to have political power, they seem to want to assert they have large numbers, which makes no sense if it's just a psychological state.
Yeah. Thunderous, last thought from yourself?
Yeah, I think he's just edging his bets there. Romans 1:20 is quite clear. It tells off with Romans 1:20 so that his invisible qualities are inexcusable. There is no excuse to make a statement like this, whether you're looking using a microscope or a telescope. The evidence for an intelligent designer is profound. As the scripture says, it's inexcusable. So there's more sometimes, you're probably aware of this, Lloyd. I know I've spoken to you a couple of times on this, that in the scientific world at the moment, there is a lot of propaganda and money invested to have a certain mindset or a certain narrative you have to adhere to. Perhaps that'll be something we'll be knocking on at a later point in another show. But I think Carl Sagan has just been very smart here in just sitting on the agnostic fence.
Yeah, I will say in practice, he acted like an atheist, a hard atheist, whereas he would always state he was an agnostic. In practice, he spoke like and acted like a proper atheist. And Melvin says, I suppose an atheist might argue that war death numbers might be overweighted against the 20th. You know, they all say that. They all say that. I ask them, okay, fine, bring me some hard numbers. Then they're like, oh, I'm a little busy right now. Unless looked at as a percentage of population at different times. Look, those are hard numbers. Those are the numbers. Right. So, yeah. Okay, so he never returned his horses. I don't mind their beliefs, but just like another religion, they demand to force their beliefs on everyone. Well, they believe they're on a mission, they're on a cause. Thaddeus, last question. This question by Malvin H2L. What is your response to that?
Well, the one slide was number of deaths. And you know, you could make an argument that since there's many more people living now, that naturally deaths would be higher. The other, however, was a number of wars or number of atrocities, which has nothing to do with the number killed in those atrocities. So that excuse doesn't work. And indeed, it would be more heavily weighted towards the past when conflict was more common. The reason that so many people die in World War I is because conflict conflict is relatively uncommon. So when one does happen, it kills a much larger number of people. So if we're looking at something that's potentially overweighted towards the past when atheism wasn't prevalent, and it still shows that it's all caused by secular governments and has nothing to do with religion, really undermines that argument completely.
And then also atheists make the claim, and socialists also made the claim, but atheists have constantly made the claim, we are here to abolish wars. We've been told this by atheists. It's written in their documentation that atheism is going to bring peace because religion causes wars. Atheism will bring peace. Well, secular beliefs brought more slaughter and destruction than history has ever known. They amplified the destruction by unimaginable amounts. So imagine.
So that one stat that you had was that more people were killed under atheist regimes during peace times than in war and of the past. So this peace that they're bringing doesn't seem to be all that great to me.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is when you look at, say, the arguments that the atheists have, they'll always refer back to something like World War II and say the Holocaust of the Jews because there's a religious connotation to it. Yet they don't mention anything about, say, the deaths caused by Stalin post-World War II, the deaths caused by Mao post-World War II, and they don't mention much about the deaths caused by Pol Pot post-World War II. That number is into the hundreds of million. So.
Yeah.
You know, you can see the emotive argument where they're lending the argument towards more religion than they are to the atheistic practices.
Yeah, and also we can trace those exact behaviors where the government murdered people who didn't follow their theology, their ideology, to the French Revolution, which was the world's first atheistic state. They murdered everyone who would not convert away from Christianity to their godlessness. So they demanded it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I think the word democide, where the state murders its own people, just a simple cursory investigation into democide in the past 100 years should yield enough arguments against atheists.
I've covered that before, and I used Rummel's death by government. So yeah, guys, we should end here. I think we've gone for 1 hour 22 minutes. I think it's sort of a good time to wrap up here with Carl Lewis here, great sprinter and famous astronomer. So guys, I'll end off here, and thank you very much for your likes, shares, and subscribes. Thank you to my two guests. I do appreciate it. Reason Dances has let's just say he's been very free to critique what I say in the past, and he's forced me to go back to the drawing board more than once. So my work has to meet his very critical eye and his high standards. Or he gives me the hairy eyeball, and it's a very unpleasant hairy eyeball, let me tell you. You know, he gives you this, he just kind of says, he doesn't actually say anything, but you just feel really bad. You just feel really bad, and you just sort of slink back to you in shame to the drawing board. So I've been there a few times. So,
well, there's no intention to shame you. I just ask questions to make sure that what you're saying is correct, and then you're like, maybe I need to make sure that it's correct.
So
that's all.
So
no shaming.
So guys, thank you. And for those who support the channel, who are members of the channel, thank you very much. And I do appreciate everyone who has been supportive. And guys, please look up Thunderous's channel, look up Reason Dances channel. They're both in the name of the presentation, Reason Dances and Thunderous. And please do give them support. And guys, we'll continue this perhaps next week. We'll continue. I think we're 21 slides of 57. So thank you all. I hope this has been enlightening, been interesting and educational. Please use this information. I hope you can use it in your discussions with atheists. So more to come on this topic in the near future. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye, everyone.
God bless.
Good night. God bless.